What has the first black president done for the black community in America? Nothing, according to some. Just recently, Obama's been catering to a number of minority communities in the U.S. First, it was the LGBT community.
At a certain point, I've just concluded that, for me personally, it is important for me to go ahead and affirm that I think same-sex couples should be able to get married.
Then it was the immigrant community.
This is a temporary stopgap measure that lets us focus our resources wisely while giving a degree of relief and hope to talented, driven, patriotic young people. It is the right thing to do.
So what about African Americans? Obama hasn't made moves to deal with African American inequalities in this country. In an op-ed titled, "Obama's not the first black president, he's the first president who is black," Wilmer Leon describes Obama as a, quote, functionary of a government in the service of wealth and empire. To join me now to speak more about his article is Dr. Wilmer Leon himself. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for inviting me.
So what do you mean by Obama is not the first black president?
Well, what I mean by that is, as I say in the article, that a black president would have come to the Oval Office with a black agenda. He would be using his bully pulpit to articulate and advocate for positions and issues that are specifically relevant to the African American community. For example, disproportionate levels of incarceration in this country, disproportionate levels of poverty in terms of the black community in this country, health care issues that are specifically targeted to the African American community. As the first president who is black, President Obama is focused more on the national agenda as the President of the United States, as a functionary of the United States government, as opposed to an individual who came to the Oval Office with an agenda that was created or designed to specifically target issues in the African American community. And I want to be very clear and say that, as I say in the article, that this has everything to do with policy. It has everything to do with an agenda and has absolutely nothing to do with the person or personalities.
And you also mentioned in your article the NDAA, extrajudicial assassination,
yes,
and also Guantanamo Bay.
Yes.
How is that part of the black agenda?
Well, it's not so much a part of the black agenda as it is, I say in the piece, that an African American president would not have signed the 2012 Defense Authorization Act that in part allows for indefinite detention of American citizens. That an African American president would not have backed the assassination of Muammar Gaddafi. An African American or black president would not have had an attorney general come out and say that the United States government can assassinate Americans anywhere in the world. And the reason is because a black president would have come into the office with a historical understanding, for example, of the FBI counterintelligence program. A black president would understand how the United States government infiltrated civil rights organizations in the 60s and undermined the efforts of the civil rights organization. He would understand how the government has been used over time to undermine efforts for civil rights and civil liberties by African American organizations. So having that historic understanding, he would be less inclined to support legislation or support ideas that would enable the government to engage in those types of behaviors today.
Do you think that he doesn't have a historical understanding of what has happened in the civil rights era and also?
Well, I'm sure that President Obama, particularly being a constitutional scholar, is very much aware of that history. But again, because he does not bring that agenda into the Oval Office, that's not what is controlling his thought process, that is not what is controlling his vision. He is more concerned with, as he says, he's the president of everybody. And also I want to be very clear to say, I'm not saying that he should bring this to the Oval Office. I'm making the observation that he has not. And that it's very important at the end of the day, what I believe the African American community needs to understand. That is, if we as a community, if we as an interest group are looking to have our issues addressed, then we have to make it happen. We have to do, as Roosevelt said to A. Philip Randolph in 1936. He said, yes, Mr. Randolph, I agree with you. Go out and make me do it. I think there are too many of us in the African American community that are sitting idly by waiting for President Obama to do what we believe needs to be done, instead of being in the streets as the gay and lesbian community has been, being in the streets as the Hispanic community has been. We need to be in the streets championing our issues the same way that other organizations, such as AIPAC. There's no way in the world that AIPAC is going to sit idly by and allow an American president not to focus foreign policy on Israel in the manner in which they want it addressed. And so if we have concerns in our community, then we need to move away from the politics of personality and start understanding the politics of policy. Because it's one thing to have an African American individual sitting in the White House. That's wonderful. That symbolism is incredibly powerful and incredibly valuable. But at the end of the day, politics is not about symbolism. Politics is about policy.
Wilmer, are you surprised, though? I mean, Obama didn't really grow up in any relation to the black culture. He didn't grow up in the ghetto. He's always been a very privileged man with a rich family. Are you surprised at him kind of evading really honing in on the focus of the African community? Well,
first of all, the African American community is much more diverse than urban, and President Obama did not grow up wealthy. He was born to a single mother. He grew up, his mother worked a number of jobs. He grew up with his grandparents. True, he did not grow up in the traditional, we'll say, African American community, but the point, again, is not individually focused, it's policy focused. So whether President Obama grew up in Harlem or whether President Obama grew up in Denver, Colorado, it's still incumbent upon those in the African American community to ensure that our interests are being articulated and that our interests are being acted upon, no matter who is in the White House. And I think that to me is the point that your audience needs to take away from this conversation, is that the fact that there is an African American in the White House is a wonderful thing. But for too many of us to sit by and expect that because he is African American, he is then going to address the issues that we need addressed is a fallacy. We have to be out in the streets. The Civil Rights Movement was a movement, and it was part of a process. And too much of that process has been forgotten. And so now, because we've had the 64 Voting Rights Act, the 64 Civil Rights Act and 65 Voting Rights Act, we think that progress that progress has been made, and that so now we don't need to engage in those politics anymore. But now is the definite time that we need to, as we see the rise of the Tea Party, as we listen to Mitt Romney, as we see that Orion's budget is looking to cut social programs. We have to be in the streets advocating, championing, ensuring that our interests are addressed instead of expecting that someone is going to do them for us.
So what would you say to people who look at Obama and say, I voted for him because he's black, because that in itself is just such an iconic symbol of progress across the world that we elected the first African-American president, and I will continue to vote for him just because he is black, even though he's not really making any overtures to change policy?
That I would say you get what you vote for. And you voted for symbolism, and you got symbolism. But politics, again, has to be more than symbolic. It has to be based on policy. So there are those of us, on the one hand, and again, the symbolism is incredibly powerful and incredibly valid, but politics is about policy. And so if we, as a community, are interested in policy outcome, then we have to be putting pressure on the system to ensure that we get it. And there are too many people with these champagne bottles left over from 2008 that are walking around still celebrating the fact that we have a president who is black. Those champagne bottles are empty. And now we have to reinvigorate ourselves. We have to get back out into the street. We have to get back into the process and engage the process to be sure that we get disproportionate incarceration addressed and the other issues that are so important to our community.
And Wilmer, I just wanted to elucidate your point a little bit with visuals. We have a graph right now of showing how Americans have 22 times the amount of wealth, or I'm sorry, white Americans have 22 times the amount of wealth, and blacks, a figure that's doubled since the Great Depression. And when unemployment was at 8% in this country, black unemployment was by far the highest out of any race.
That is an incredible, incredible demonstration of the fact that white Americans in this country have over $100,000 in wealth. That's not salary, that's tangible assets, homes, stocks, bonds, cash on hand. African Americans have less than on average, $5,000 of actual wealth. So it's one thing to talk about unemployment at 8.2 or 8.3%, but it's another thing to talk about poverty, because that is the real systemic problem that has been a drag on this economy much longer than the last 4 or 5 years that we've been dealing with this downturn in terms of employment and the unemployment rate. So for a president to be talking about unemployment, but to not be specifically talking about poverty, that is a perfect example of why we in the African American community, because we are disproportionately impacted by those poverty statistics and by those poverty realities, we have to be out there advocating that the Ryan budget not be cut as it relates to social programs. We have allowed the whole structure of the conversation to shift to be focused on what's not going to be cut, instead of taking control of the narrative and understanding we have to focus the conversation on what's actually going to be spent and where.
And broadening the perspective, really
Absolutely.
focusing on the systemic causes of why this is happening.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for coming
My
in
pleasure.
and talking
Thank you.
about your op-ed. It's a great one.
Thank you.
That was Dr. Wilmer Leon, political science professor for Howard University.